Let's start with a number. 5,607. That's how many commutation applications President Trump denied in a single batch last month. Add another 300 pardon applications denied alongside them. Nearly 6,000 people, one decision, almost no public attention, no press conference, no signing ceremony, no statement from the White House, just a letter. Here's the paper trail. The denial letter is dated July 14th, signed by Ed Martin, the U.S. pardon attorney. It went out to United States attorneys' offices across the country. But here's the detail that almost nobody caught the letter indicated that Martin's office had actually started issuing the rejections 4 days earlier, on July 10th. So the list existed before the letter announcing it did. And even then, it took almost another week before it became public on July 17th. Reason Magazine now, who were these nearly 6,000 people? According to reporting from the New York Times, most of them lacked political connections, and they had waited patiently in a queue while the president awarded pardons and commutations to allies who skipped that line entirely. Reason Magazine, that's the core tension of this story. Not that clemency got denied. Presidents deny far more petitions than they grant. That's normal. The tension is who gets denied and who doesn't have to wait at all. Let's talk about timing first, because there's a wrinkle here. This year is the country's 250th anniversary, the semi-quincentennial. There had been real anticipation inside the administration that Trump might mark the occasion with a wave of clemency, potentially as many as 250 people. That wave never came. Reason Magazine instead, on July 3rd, right before the holiday, Trump issued pardons to 11 men, 10 of them convicted for Clean Air Act violations tied to selling or installing devices that defeated diesel emissions controls, making trucks more powerful but far more polluting. The 11th name on that list was different. Adam Kidan, a major Republican donor who had served roughly 2.5 years for lying to banks to finance a casino boat scheme. Yahoo, so that's the actual 4th of July clemency output, not 250 ordinary Americans. 11 names, one of them a political donor. A White House official later said there had never actually been a plan to issue 250 pardons for the holiday in the first place. Reason Magazine then, roughly a week later, the other list drops. Not a list of names receiving mercy. A list of nearly 6,000 people being told no. Here's what the letter does and doesn't say. Ed Martin's letter didn't provide much explanation for the individual denials. Instead, it cited a section of the law describing how a president can either affirmatively reject clemency petitions or simply let denial recommendations from the Attorney General's office take effect without weighing in personally. In other words, the letter doesn't tell you whether Trump personally looked at any of these 6,000 files. It doesn't even confirm that he reviewed and rejected them himself. Legally, they can go out the door as long as somebody down the chain signs off, or nobody objects in time. Reason Magazine, that's worth sitting with. Nearly 6,000 people's chances at freedom or a clean record resolved through a process that may not have required the president to look at a single one of their names. Now compare that to how clemency has actually worked for people with the right connections this term. Start with Scott Jenkins, a former sheriff convicted on what reporting describes as fairly blatant corruption charges. When Trump pardoned him, Ed Martin didn't dress it up. Martin posted on social media thanking the president for the pardon and adding the phrase, "No MAGA left behind." That's not spin from a critic. That's the pardon attorney's own words, in public, about his own office's work. Lisa Legalinfo, then, there's the international case. Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, convicted of conspiring with drug traffickers to import over 400 tons of cocaine into the United States, was serving a 45-year sentence. Trump freed him after a letter reportedly reached the president through advisor Roger Stone. A former head of state convicted in one of the largest narco-trafficking conspiracies prosecuted in a U.S. court. out not through the ordinary channel of nearly 6,000 people waiting their turn, but through a personal letter that found its way to the right advisor. Lisa Legal Info, and then there's January 6th. On his first day back in office, Trump pardoned roughly 5,500 people charged in the Capitol riot, including some convicted of assaulting police, and issued commutations for others. Stewart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers, convicted of seditious conspiracy and sentenced to 18 years, had his sentence commuted that day rather than receiving a full pardon. Some of those defendants haven't stopped there. Months later, a lawyer with ties to Trump personally delivered 11 new pardon applications directly to Ed Martin at the Justice Department, including a renewed push to convert Rhodes's commutation into a full pardon, plus applications for Proud Boys members Joseph Biggs, Ethan Nordean, Zachary Rail, and Dominic Pizzola. Martin didn't promise anything, but he did agree to personally forward those applications to the White House pardon czar for review. Fox News Direct Delivery. Personal review, a named contact inside the Justice Department who takes your case straight to the person who decides. That's not how it worked for the 5,607. There is a legitimate case for the administration side of this, and it's worth stating plainly rather than dismissing. The pardon power is constitutionally the president's alone, unreviewable by courts. Every modern president has denied far more clemency petitions than they granted. That's not new. And clearing out a massive backlog with a bulk denial isn't automatically improper by itself. Federal clemency queues run into the tens of thousands at any given time, most languishing for years regardless of who's in office. A president batch denying a large chunk of a stale backlog is something both parties have done before. And there's a fairness point buried in this too, a no MAGA left behind comment about one pardon doesn't, by itself. Prove that thousands of other legitimate petitions were denied for political reasons rather than on the merits. It's entirely possible many of those 5,607 files simply didn't meet whatever threshold the office was using. The letter's reliance on the standard legal mechanism for clemency delegation isn't unusual or secretive procedure that authority has existed for decades. Where the story earns its edge isn't the existence of denials. It's the contrast, sitting side by side in the same month, a public outreach effort for second chance candidates from the pardon czar, a highly visible fast lane for donors, political allies, and January 6th defendants with connected lawyers, and then quietly. Thousands of ordinary applicants closed out in a single letter with no individual explanation. What's still unknown, whether Trump personally reviewed any meaningful share of the 5,607 denials, what specific criteria, if any, were applied across the batch, and whether the pardon czar's spring outreach to university clemency clinics will eventually produce a public list of grants to set against this one. Alice Marie Johnson, the White House pardon czar, publicly asked clemency clinics in May to submit candidates worth a second look so there is at least one visible pipeline that could still produce good news for some of these applicants down the line. Whether it does is the thing to watch. That's what's actually documented as of today, July 28th. I'll keep tracking this as more of the list and more reporting comes out.